Yeah, so my name is Johnny Perez. I work as Director of U.S. Prison Programs for the National Religious Campaign Against Torture. And we're an interfaith organization based in D.C. and comprised of over 300 members. Our work spans across 11 different states, all with legislative and active campaigns to end the torture of solitary confinement and other forms of state-sponsored torture. You know, we work with faith leaders and those just like myself and others on this call who have not only been impacted by the criminal punishment system, but also their families as well. And in preparation for this conversation, I continue and was in awe of this opportunity to be able to moderate this panel. You know, for those of you who followed my career, you know that I am and continue and will always be a huge advocate for centering the voices, experiences, and even most importantly, the guidance of people who've been impacted by the system, like many of you who've tuned in to see this call and many of folks who are actually on this call. And my advocacy journey began while incarcerated, as a law in New York. And since my many, with much support of people just like yourselves who've taken out, you know, today to tune into this conversation. I'll say, you know, the people that you're going to hear from and learn from today actually bring back the perspectives and experiences and even solutions to these current challenges facing people who've all been impacted by this machine that we call mass incarceration. And I also say that if you tuned in to hear, you know, sad stories about folks who are incarcerated, you might leave disappointed, because although stories are really critical to the culture change and narrative change, today we'll be actually discussing solutions, challenges, and even getting updates about what the work looks like to protect our most vulnerable folks during this COVID-19 pandemic. So in other words, we're more than just stories, that we also have solutions too. So with that being said, I'm honored to moderate this panel discussion, and I'm going to now ask the panelists, you know, to briefly introduce themselves.
Hey, good evening, everybody. This is Griffin from Michigan. I am the Smart Justice Campaign organizer for West Michigan out here, and our focus has primarily been on bail reform and pretrial practice reform.
Yeah, my name is Elizer Darris. I'm a Smart Justice organizer in Minnesota.
Thank you.
Kristie Puckett Williams, the statewide campaign for Smart Justice manager here in North Carolina.
Nice.
I'm Dominique Walker. I am a community organizer here in Dallas, Texas.
I'm Jarrett M. I am an attorney practicing civil and criminal, and I am based in New York.
And I am Erica Perez. I am a Smart Justice advocate.
What's up, everyone? My name is Sean Wilson. I'm the statewide organizer for the Campaign for Smart Justice here in Wisconsin.
Thank you, Sean. And Erica, can you repeat your introduction again? I didn't think I quite heard it. Thanks.
Sorry about that. Can you guys hear me now? Okay, so my name is Erica Perez, and I am a Smart Justice advocate in the state of Kentucky.
Awesome.
My name is Louis Conway Jr., and I'm a national campaign strategist with ACLU National.
Nice. Thank you so much. You know, when we think about the ACLU, like for folks who've never heard of ACLU, think that the ACLU, not only in addition to doing great work, but they may not know that the ACLU has a ton of different and many different campaigns. You know, I've worked with some of your colleagues like Amy Fettig on the Stop Solitary campaign. And I know that most of you are working on the Smart Justice campaign. So for those who don't know anything about the Smart Justice campaign, and Sean, I'm gonna come to you. You know, can you give some insight as to what the Smart Justice campaign is, and then we'll go into a short intro video after that. Thank you.
Can you give some insight as to what the Smart Justice campaign? Absolutely. So the Smart Justice Campaign is a nationwide campaign to reduce the prison and jail population and to fight racism within the criminal legal system. The way that we're doing this is we're centering the voices of directly impacted persons, as well as centering the voices of directly impacted communities. This is a campaign that is all over the country, being led by impacted folks, because we believe that those who are close to the problem are close to the solution. And this is how we reform our criminal legal system.
Nice, thank you for sharing that, Sean. You know, and the reason I mentioned in the beginning that, you know, we're more than just stories is because we do have solutions to the problems that many live through. So I want to pivot a video that really kind of highlights the ACLU's COVID-19 response, which has both been very comprehensive and effective. So I want to please take a moment to view this short video. Thanks.
So this is a situation that requires an extraordinary amount of response, and the Department of Correction at the moment appears to be treating it as if it's the flu.
I really think, Doctor, you want to treat this like you treat the flu, right?
Incarceration makes it literally impossible to engage in the kind of social distancing that public health experts are recommending.
It's really scary sitting in there. I know how fast an illness can go.
For a long time, abortion opponents have been trying to shut down this clinic, and they're hoping the COVID-19 pandemic will help them close it at least temporarily.
It is critical that we do everything to make sure that access to abortion care is protected.
More than 37,000 immigrants are jailed in crowded facilities across the United States.
This pandemic impacts all of us, regardless of immigration status.
Any response to COVID-19 must reduce the footprint of the nation's criminal legal system.
No one should have to choose between protecting their health or exercising their right to vote.
You know, they're telling us to stay in the house, but then one of the most important times, they're forcing us to come out here.
Making vote by mail an option for all eligible voters is just common sense.
We cannot be 6 feet apart. If it breaks out in here, everybody's gonna get it.
Our prisons and jails in this country are overcrowded, they're filthy, they're unsanitary, and frankly, the medical care is pretty bad in the best of times.
You have to reduce the population. You have to let people out.
Today, the American Civil Liberties Union filed a class action petition to release inmates at Elkton.
ACLU of Ohio, the ACLU of Georgia,
ACLU of Indiana.
The ACLU of Vermont is calling on officials to prevent the rapid spread by reducing the prison population.
We received a letter from the ACLU on the 20th. By the 23rd, we had to have a list of low-impact, nonviolent offenders to be released out into the communities.
There's not a solid response or game plan for COVID-19 in our carceral system, period.
I was incredibly disappointed to see this kind of opportunistic use of the COVID-19 pandemic for some political purposes.
The group saying abortion shouldn't be ruled elective, adding those who need them don't have time to wait.
I have to come down here today and risk my life to vote.
The last thing we want is for people to risk their health and safety when there are options available at this time for them to safely vote without having to put themselves in danger.
Today, Google and Apple announced that they have a tracking tool that would allow health professionals to contact you if you've been near someone who has tested positive.
The ACLU says it wants to ensure any contact tracing app remains voluntary and only for the duration of this pandemic.
The ACLU of Michigan yesterday filed suit fighting for the release of immigrants detained in jails throughout the state.
Being an immigrant should not be a death sentence.
California is granting early release to 3,500 inmates.
It's such a relief to be out of the sickness, out of the possibility of dying in there.
Today, a judge in Austin ruled in favor of civil rights organizations suing to increase the availability of mail-in ballots during the coronavirus pandemic.
Federal judges have temporarily blocked some states from using coronavirus emergency orders to delay and in some cases deny abortion care.
The ACLU issued this notice asking the governor to consider 7 groups of prisoners for release.
It only takes one person in one of these facilities to test positive.
To release people whose only offense is being in the country without documents.
If it wasn't time before, this crisis is the time to act now.
We want science, not politics and not prejudice, to inform the response to COVID-19. And at the ACLU, we're going to fight to ensure that it does. Thank you.
It's a really powerful video. Thank you for sharing that, for all of your work. You know, the second to last person talked about the time and the urgency of the matter. You know, and I kind of, you know, working on criminal justice reform issues, we know these issues were already urgent before COVID-19. And I'm wondering how has the current COVID-19 pandemic has actually increased or impacted the urgency in your area of work? Anyone can take that on.
I tell you, I can jump in with that. So my affiliate, we already had, and again, I'm Eli, I'm with the ACLU of Minnesota, and we already had strategic priorities identified that we had intended on working throughout that year and you know, winning on those issues that we did identify. But, you know, after COVID and the urgency of these times, we immediately had to pivot our priorities to a near all-out COVID response, both at the state and local levels. This included advocacy with local police chiefs, as well as departmental commissioners and the governor as well. So the spirit of these times called for an all-out pivot, and it demanded that we utilize much more urgency with regards to pushing for reforms and pushing to save lives. And so these times really created urgency on our part and completely changed our strategic priorities.
What are other folks seeing in their respective areas?
And I'll speak for, go ahead, Sean.
We'll go Sean and then Dominique, and then we'll go to the next question. Thanks.
Okay, so absolutely, our work has pivoted a great deal as well because of the urgency of this matter. We know that this is a deadly virus, and we know that if it enters into the correctional facilities, it's going to be catastrophe. I think we are witnessing that in Ohio currently, where majority of the population that has tested, many of them have tested positive. So our work here in Wisconsin has pivoted because we understand that we need to begin to depopulate our prisons because we're currently sitting at over 23,000 folks in prison, and they are not able to social distance. So we're calling on the governor, we're calling on sheriffs to begin to depopulate these correctional facilities so that social distancing is implemented and folks are staying safe.
Thank you. Dominique?
For Texas, I know it's completely reframing the narrative that we're pushing forward. A lot of the groups that have been doing this work have been doing this work for a long time, pushing to end mass incarceration, pushing to decarcerate our jails and prisons. And it shifted from us pitching from a moral stance to pitching from this is a public health crisis. This is a potential death sentence for these populations that if there will be no intervention, then what we are doing is essentially sentencing these people to death while they're incarceration.
Nice. I'm actually going to go to you, Jared, to also add to this conversation, add to that question. Okay.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. You know, as I think about COVID-19 and the response, I think about the overall mission of the criminal justice reform, and they actually have some things in common. We are releasing people because of COVID-19 due to age, due to their health. And we're doing it now with a sense of urgency to a certain degree. But this is the same thing that we've been advocating for to directly affect the population that is the balloon to 2.3 million people. So in one stance, I can say, I'm happy that at least some of the people who are older in age and who have ailments are being considered, but explain it to me why they weren't being considered for the simple fact that they were of older age, that they were of sickly health. It just goes to show you that we can take a situation like this, no matter how worse it is, and turn it into a tool to be able to make our point. We should have already been doing this.
That's a really good point. And later on, I'm going to ask a question about the post-COVID world, you know, and what does reform look like post-COVID. You know, right now, it feels like, you know, a lot of it should have never happened in the first place, right? Like, these folks should have been released in the first place, right? These folks are not dangerous. These folks are already too poor not to be released. So I guess another question that I would have for this group, and I could like to hear from folks who haven't participated yet, like, what are some of the reform policies that you think could have been implemented to prevent a crisis like this from happening in the first place? You know, some folks might say, well, yeah, we have to really look at some of these policies. So what are some policies that could have been or should be put in place to prevent pandemics like this from impacting our loved ones?
Hey, Johnny. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I think you hit the nail on the head with mass incarceration. If we responded to economic and social and political issues with solutions that are rooted in those things, then we wouldn't be at mass incarceration. So the things that we have to work towards are decarceration and the depopulation to beat back some of those problematic bills that have existed for forever. And so for me, I just see it as we have to abolish and as Dominique said, reframe the narrative about what this is. This is all types of crises rolled up into one, but it is definitely a public health issue. So correctional health is public health. And so we have to look at the most marginalized in our communities and see what they deserve and serve them. And then the rest of us will pretty much have it the way that it needs to be. So we have to focus on the incarcerated people and their health and their humanity. I think all of the policies and procedures of a carceral system are to dehumanize and disconnect people from their humanity and the society from a person's humanity. That's what allows us to treat people this way or allow us to be comfortable with.
That's a really great response. I'm gonna come back to it. Eric, I know you had something you wanted to add. Got to unmute yourself there.
That during the General Assembly here in Kentucky, one of the things that we're trying to push politicians towards is to offer those alternatives to incarceration. Yeah. We wanted to push for them to end cash bail and to let people out who were sitting their pre-trial and who hadn't been convicted of a crime, because those were unnecessary. People that didn't have to be there. And so now that COVID-19 has surfaced, and we still have these people who are sitting there. They're not charged with the crime. They just can't post bail. And so if we would have taken the initiative in the beginning rather than waiting for a COVID-19 outbreak, then we could have prevented a lot of safety concerns.
Nice. Can I have another person chime in? Jarrett?
Yeah, I'm sorry. So I was talking when I had it on mute. You know, I just think about this. You know, we most certainly have to focus on, you know, decarceration. But I think that the only way it's sustainable is for us to talk about reentry. If you look right now at the current populations inside of our incarceration system, both federal, state, and in the jails, over 50% of that population has had some interaction with the criminal justice system before. And unfortunately, they found their way back. Now, think about this in terms of a manufacturer of a product. Think about if the product is producing, this manufacturer is producing a product, and then within 2 to 3 years, over 50% of that product comes back to the manufacturer because there's a problem. Don't you know that we will be shutting down that manufacturer until we fix what was wrong with the product? So why do we allow ourselves to look at the prison population and say, well, that's those people, that's not the same thing as a product?
That's interesting. So your opponents might say, well, reentry is a little bit too late and we should just prevent folks from being arrested in the first place. They may say, school to prison pipeline, how, they'll look at policing, how we're disproportionately impacted by policing and being put in these spaces in the first place. When you think about diversion, ways to divert folks and keeping people out, do you see opportunities there?
Absolutely. I mean, how do you divert someone or give a person the opportunity to be diverted if their father's locked up with 50 years for a non-fatal offense? Look, this thing is deeper than rap, you know what I mean? And what Rick Ross would say, right? So it's more than just, hey, if we prevent them from doing this, then they wouldn't be in the first place. It's historically, there are tentacles that reach us historically from what has went on in the Black and brown community. When people reintegrate and get released from the prison system, they don't go into the affluent neighborhoods. They go right back into the same impoverished neighborhoods in which they were arrested in. And those impoverished neighborhoods are the true victims here, right? Because they're getting people who are ill, prepared to re-enter society. So it's a whole thing that's a circle that's beating up the community. And when you think about COVID-19, you think about how some people aren't able to afford to institute social distancing practices as well as others are who have the resources to do so.
Nice. Thank you for that, Jarrett. Kristie, as you were talking, I was thinking about how corrections usually has a punitive response to issues that are usually public health responses. And I think COVID-19 has really heightened that in a way in which really makes it real for people, right? Like there are people being placed in solitary because they have a fever, not because of they harm someone, literally because they're sick, right? So, so taking that thought, I want to come to you, Erica, and if I want you to see if you can talk a little bit, right? If looking at the state of things from a public health perspective, what are some of the concerns of our incarcerated communities as it relates to psychological effects of the pandemic, and what is the effect on the general public? If you can give us some feedback on that.
I think when it comes to mental health, it's just like Jared said, it depends on what your accessibility is to resources. And so if I live in an impoverished neighborhood, I may not have a COVID-19 response because I'm still worrying about if I'm going to be able to feed my family or pay the bills. And what we're seeing in my agency specifically is there is an increase because we have a crisis hotline that's available for people to utilize if they're able to access that service. But we've had like a 50% increase in those phone calls for people who are abusing substances. You have people who are self-medicating because they don't know what else to do, and you have suicidal ideation that's elevated. And so people are going to respond a little differently, but if we have access to resources, and I might be able to practice good self-care, and I might be able to utilize the internet as a resource to connect to other people. But what about the person who is unhoused or the people that are overcrowded in shelters and have to worry about coming in close contact with other people because they don't have the ability to just isolate or to social distance? They have to be in crowded spaces, or either they have to sleep on a cold, hard street. And so you have to ask yourself, like, it's now coming into a time where before social work and mental health was not considered a priority, but now everybody has been affected by COVID-19. And I think people are really realizing that mental health has to be sustained. And so people are realizing that that service is needed. And so what we're doing here is trying to make sure that we are actually getting people out of jail and institutions, that we have resources available to connect them, because here in the state of Kentucky, we have inmates who are, I mean, and I don't call them inmates, let me just say that. But you have our governor who is saying, right, our governor who is saying the inmates are trying to get out, and you know, they're saying, please don't let me die here. And so you have families who are saying, no, these are not inmates, these are people, these are parents, these are somebody's children. And so we need to do something to make sure that our citizens are being returned home. And so mental health plays into that, but you have people right now who are incarcerated who are fearful for their lives, and they have no ability to protect themselves. And so the level of mental health stability is going to depend on what you're accessible to. And people who are incarcerated don't have access to resources. They're literally waiting on someone else to make sure that their lives are stable. And we have people now, I have a friend, she had to tell her brother that he tested positive for COVID-19. His roommate died and he didn't even know that he tested positive. And the Green River Detention Center can't even be accountable for what the next step should be because they haven't checked on him. So it's a lot of stuff that goes on that we are not aware of. And so our brothers and sisters who are incarcerated are facing a lot more trauma on the inside than they would if they were out here and having available resources with the rest of us.
You know, it's funny. I want to take this moment also to highlight the experiences of women. I'm gonna start with you, Kristie, and then invite Erica and Dominique to chime in, since you're the women in this conversation. You know, before COVID-19, you know, women were already being incarcerated and arrested at higher rates than any other population, demographic population across the country. You know, and I'm wondering now, as we talk about releasing folks, right? We've seen a lot of releases on the jail level, but not many on the prison level, on the state level. So wondering, you know, how has COVID-19 disproportionately impacted women? Like, what are you seeing, you know, in terms of releases and just impact? And then inviting Erica and Dominique to chime in briefly after you.
We see some of the same things that we see on the side of the men, the reluctance of the government to allow women to come home, to reunite with their families in the midst of the pandemic, especially the most vulnerable population of people who are pregnant people. And so here in North Carolina, our Department of Public Safety's response to a woman being pregnant before the pandemic was to place her in solitary confinement and safekeeping. And so they've continued that torturous practice of confining pregnant women to very small spaces, having them go out. I think they just released a letter the other day saying that they get to go outside now twice a day for recreation, so that it's not so much like solitary confinement, but it's still, by all accounts, solitary confinement. And so women have an especially difficult time anyway, because carceral facilities weren't designed with women in mind. And so because of that fact, because women were an afterthought, just the setup and the design of a carceral facility, whether it be a jail, prison, or a detention center, immigration detention center, is just not conducive to women and the needs of women. And we can go as deep as to talk about sanitary napkins not being available for women who menstruate every month. That's pre-pandemic. You know what I mean? And so we can just imagine with supply chains being interrupted and the crisis that this country is facing, that those types of things are still being experienced by women. I was a pregnant woman who was incarcerated while pregnant and received no prenatal care. That's before a pandemic. And I was there for many months and received no prenatal care, right? And so that same thing is happening. The pressure is still on people to take plea deals because they're too poor to purchase their freedom. If they're being held pretrial, so they take a plea deal, whether they did it or not, so that they can get out, so they can have that baby and that baby not be born into captivity like their mother or their father is. And so because of that, it's especially hard on women when they are incarcerated.
Yes, thank you. Could I invite Dominique or Erica to chime in for a quick minute?
Yeah, not much to add. I would say that Kristie hit the nail on the head. Just being a woman, just moving in a patriarchal society, everything is heightened in this moment. So all of the issues are just, magnified. If you think about just some of the issues that Kristie talked about that women are enduring in carceral facilities, everything is magnified in this moment. And there's not much conversation going on around that specific need and that specific demographic in the larger media.
And then anyone can take this next question. When we think about these places of incarceration, these carceral places, the reason a lot of this injustice is allowed to happen is because we just don't know. So now when everyone's quarantined and self-isolating, the media has become a critical organizing component of the work that we're doing, getting the word out, getting the right information out to the right people, highlighting the right atrocities, for lack of a better term, for folks to be informed about what's going on. So in your own experiences, in your own states, and in the work that you do, what do you see that the media is actually missing? What could they be doing better, when in terms of the media, what is the media missing when covering the predicament our government has allowed to happen in these mass populations? And what do you think they could do better?
I can jump in here real quick, Sean. One thing that can be done, and this is Rich Griffin, the organizer for West Michigan, working on the Smart Justice campaign here. In recent weeks, myself and our editor-in-chief or editor-at-large at the ACLU of Michigan have taken several calls and recorded many conversations with inmates inside. We produced that information to NPR radio station here that played a significant portion of those conversations of young men calling and telling me, close friends of mine telling me that they were COVID-19 positive. I myself am recently released from incarceration, just shy of 3 years. But gentlemen were calling me and naming everybody in the housing unit that I left from, that I cooked up with or worked out with or walked the yard with. And the stories that the media can be covering are those that the information that's really going on from inside. Or the gentlemen and the women that are housed there. But when you hear from them directly, then they can barely get their voice to a level where you can understand what's being said. Folks.
Yeah, and what I said is exactly what I was going to highlight, and that's humanize, to speak for themselves, and even being careful with the dehumanized language that they offender. When you're talking about inmate, when you're just talking about pure number or suffering across the nation, in many of these facilities, we see explosive rates of, and yet, unlike when you see in little middle America, when they have an outbreak, you don't see the faces, you don't hear the voices. The only way we're seeing the faces and the voices is because some of the brothers and some of the sisters are able to sneak video cameras into these facilities and film for themselves and speak for themselves you know, as opposed to media allowing the voices of those who are directly being impacted, who are directly suffering within these incubators for destruction, these incubators for infection, to speak for themselves in a real humanized kind of way. These are our brothers, our sisters, our cousins, our aunts, our uncles. These are people, and almost 90% or higher will be coming out. They will be coming home. And for those who are going to be in there, we certainly want to be a barrier of having them die within those facilities. A mere sentence should never turn into a death sentence. And that's one of the things that we are very focused on here at the ACLU, is helping to decarcerate and helping to humanize the voices of those behind the walls.
And if I can just add real briefly, you know, one thing that I often heard when I was behind enemy lines, when I was incarcerated, was that the walls and the barbed wires was to keep them from coming in to see what was going on in there. So what the media has to do better is in their reporting. They have to communicate the humanity of these individuals who have made a mistake and have landed in prison. That does not mean that they're no longer human. So I think that the media has to do a better job in communicating the stories that they are hearing. I think the media is more inclined to sensationalizing these stories when they get a hold of these videos and these recordings of what's happening in prison. And when they see a violent reaction that is occurring in the prison, their response is, "See, I told you so. They're animals. Look what they're doing." But they're reacting to a situation where they have no other option but to respond this way. They're in fear of their life. It is a fight or flight response. We all would respond that way if we found ourselves in these type of settings and we're surrounded by a virus that can literally prevent us from returning to our communities, our families, and our loved ones. And I just want to state real briefly, let us keep in mind that Andrea Circle Bell died in custody as a result of COVID-19. This is a virus. This is a death that was preventable.
Say his name.
And our elected officials, our governors are failing us. And we as citizens in this country have to stand up and hold them accountable.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. You know, that's real. And I really felt your energy as you were saying that. You know, it's, you know, in the work that I do, part of the struggle is really taking inventory of lawmakers who have represented our interests and those who have worked directly against our interests. And, you know, if I can just interject and say one of the things that I think we can do in this moment is really take inventory about which lawmakers are doing what in this moment, because this too shall pass, you know? So I just really want to highlight that and just express that I felt your energy in that, you know? I'm gonna ask one last question and then open it up for any possible audience questions. And then we'll also move on right after that. But really just emphasizing, like, what are some additional safeguards that can be put in place that now we see to prevent such a pandemic and such harm that we've already seen from happening? What other safeguards, in addition to engaging the media, in addition to keeping people from being there in the first place, you know, lawsuits, etc.? And what are some other thoughts that come to mind that we can literally add to this moment, so moving forward, we're not starting at a deficit, but we're starting ahead of the game?
If I can hop in here right quick. So what the ACLU has been very effective at is being able to publicly move officials, being able to publicly provide a narrative. And obviously it's because we have a certain amount of media strength that allows us to penetrate and affect the way the officials are thinking. So I think moving forward, right, it's incumbent upon organizations like the ACLU to begin to or to continue to be just as forceful in our efforts to decarcerate people in the moment, but also thinking that those efforts are going to be long lasting. So we shouldn't have folks in there for parole or probation violations to begin with. And the majority of our ledge work was removing those sanctions as possibilities. Now, the executive orders that we're pushing now, we're saying that those folks shouldn't be there in the first place. They're the easiest to release, and they're people that have not committed a new crime. So I think in terms of moving forward, there's no reason why the people that we have currently released as a result of them being on a technical violation, that we should not make those releases permanent. that they should not have to report in person, and nor should fines and fees be any kind of determining factor of the quality of their freedom. I think moving forward.
Nice.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and I would say
really
too,
like
Johnny.
that.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Kristie, and then actually go ahead, Kristie, and then we're actually going to pivot, and I'm going to send it back to Louis so we can talk about some national updates in the interest of time. And I apologize if questions come in throughout that time. I'll do my best to incorporate that into the discussion. But Kristie, go ahead.
I was just going to say that, and while people are incarcerated, I mean, we know that communicable diseases like TB, hepatitis C, all of those things have existed in carceral communities and are overrepresented in this population. And so moving forward, what we would like to see happen is people having access to things that are considered contraband now, such as hand sanitizer and disinfecting agents, things that they can do to keep themselves and their areas clean. They should have unfettered access at all times, not just in the midst of COVID, but because, again, correctional health is public health. And so them not having access to be able to clean themselves, only having access to shower certain times a week, not being able to change your sheets, not being able to change your uniform, all of those things contribute to the communicable disease that we see already present outside of COVID. So I would like to see those type of long-lasting changes happen, that regular normal things aren't considered contraband that can keep people safe.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much, Kristie. Thank you, everyone. I tell you, we can literally lock this down for 2 hours and really dissect these topics. You know, I'm going to turn around now, and Louis Conway. I've known you for a while. You're a great friend, also colleague, and now you work as a national campaign strategist. And I'm going to ask you to give us updates about national efforts to fight mass incarceration and criminal justice reform during COVID-19.
Right, I like to split this up into two pieces, right? Our national response as well as our national affiliate response. The national response, the ACLU has responded by creating an out executive order that is pressuring prosecutors, sheriffs, and governors to use their power of their offices to reduce the jail and prison populations. For us, that has been a waterfront issue. And as a result of these efforts, 30,000 people have either been released or not incarcerated in the first place. And governors have made 15 executive actions. And according to a poll that we've done, there's a strong bipartisan support for releasing people from prisons and jails, with 63% of the respondents supporting that action. That's on the good side. On the bad side, the new model shows that COVID-19 death total is high as 100,000 higher than was previously projected. We believe that those findings indicate that communities across the country practicing social distancing and following public health guidance are still experiencing much higher death rates, if no substantial action is being taken in the population. So we're still facing a massive loss of life in both jails and in communities. And in Arizona specifically, in the face of COVID-19 pandemic, they're advocating for Governor Doug Ducey to release people from the prison system who are at high risk of infection from COVID-19 and reduce the density of the prison population. In Kansas, they've been sending letters to district attorneys, police chiefs, and sheriffs throughout the state asking that their plans to keep people safe and stop needlessly incarcerating people during COVID-19. Kentucky, one of my favorite places to work, as well as Wisconsin, of course, the ACLU Kentucky has submitted several letters, including a coalition letter with conservative groups demanding release, lesser arrests, transparency, and changing of conditions of incarceration during COVID. Now, these demands have been successful in some ways, but still more needs to be done. So right now, as the governor has used 3 executive orders to release over 1,200 people, that's still only a 4% decrease in the prison population. So from a national perspective, we find that our efforts to move governors and officials have been effective, but circling back to what Jarrett explained earlier, reentry has to become part of that calculus. And as a result, we released a reentry guide as well to all of our affiliates that focuses on centering the leadership of directly impacted people once we begin this reentry process. And so wherever you are locally, contact your local ACLU affiliate, and let's begin to build those relationships across those service lines. Let's begin to build relationships across those housing and health lines as well. And that's about it.
Thank you. I like how you wrapped that up really, really nice. I really appreciate that, Louis. And I know other folks who are watching appreciate that. We did have a question come in, and I know that we're set to go to 8. So what I'll say to the question, which is, the entire presentation, from Todd, which says, I was just released from jail again. What can I do to protect myself from agents that want to keep me incarcerated instead of helping me while I'm on parole? And I'll just quickly address that instead of sending it over to the panelists. I'll say that part of what you can do is definitely keep a record of everything and every interaction. Pay attention to folks on this call and folks who are going to share their information, and contact folks directly to be able to get some references and help. 9 times out of 10, there's someone in your area who's working on parole reform and engaging parole and can give you advice. And lastly, connect with other formerly incarcerated people who are not on parole to kind of help you, mentor you, and guide you through that. I found that actually to be the best help in navigating parole. As a person who successfully completed 5 years of parole after 13 years of incarceration, not one violation, that was the most help, actually the help from my peers. With that being said, I'm going to actually now ask everyone on the call to at least to please spend to just really quickly 1 minute. Actually, we were in the interest of time. If you can please share a call to action, according to your respective perspective, and then also how can folks on this call contribute to your cause, or to this essential cause?
Who's up first, Johnny?
Thank you.
So
who's up first?
Yeah, Johnny.
So Elizer, you can take it first and then pass it to the next person, and then we can pass it. There we go. Thanks.
Okay, perfect. That's exactly how we'll do it. And so my call to action is really sweet and really short, or really short and really sweet, however you want to put that. I'm creating something that's called the Smart Justice Warriors here in Minnesota. So for those of you who are in Minnesota who want to get down and be part of what we're doing, the phenomenal changes and the phenomenal work that we're doing every last single day, how we're fearlessly moving forward, fearlessly picking up the phones and going to the Capitol and going and speaking with commissioners and whomever, for anyone who wants to get down with the work that we're doing in this virtually digital age, because most of the work that we're doing now is digital due to COVID. I would absolutely love for you to send us an email with your contact information so that I can make you one of our Smart Justice Warriors.
Elizer, can you also please share how folks can contact you within your red and also folks?
Yeah, I'm about to do that. We do phone zaps. We're doing phone zaps. We're doing email blasts. We're doing most of the work that we're doing digitally. Please contact us directly at Smart Justice 1. That's the number 1, Smart Justice 1 at ACLU-MN.org. I'm also going to put that in the chat. That's Smart Justice, the number 1 at ACLU-MN.org. Come and join us. Come be a part of the Smart Justice Warriors. We're going to be thousands and thousands of bots that just go out and get this work done. And so I'm gonna pass it to Kristie, because I just gotta pass it to Kristie.
Thank you, Kristie.
Thank you, Eli. So for people to get in contact with me, you can always email me at kwilliams@aclunc.org. Again, that's kwilliams@aclunc.org. On Twitter and IG, I'm Kristie_1979. And on Facebook, I'm Kristie Puckett Williams. My call to actions are simple. Here in Mecklenburg County, every Friday we have a local action at lunchtime to show radical love to the people inside by honking our horns and our rolling protests. We also have block parties out in front of the jail, in front of the courthouse, the DA's office. And we do that to let the people inside know that we love them, and also to let system officials know that we have not forgotten our loved ones on the inside. We cannot visit them due to restrictions, but we can show up and show out every week to let them know that we love them. And we may not have the capacity to accept their telephone calls or bail them out because of the financial constraints that many families are feeling, but we can show up. And we also do this in Durham County every week at 1 o'clock at the county jail. And we recently went to the epicenter of the COVID pandemic here in North Carolina, which is News Correctional for men, and for women, it was the North Carolina Correctional Institute for Women. And we showed radical displays of love by protesting at those prisons as well. And we will be having more actions planned across the state. We have to give a shout out to North Carolina SPAN and Dr. Felicia Arriaga, who has provided assistance with gas for people who want to attend these rallies. We've had so many people driving hours and hours who would not have been able to come if not for those gas funds. Also, donate to the North Carolina Community Bail Fund and the North Carolina Pregnancy Bail Fund.
Thank you.
I'm going to pass it to Jarrett.
Thanks.
All right, thank you. Thank you all. So my call to action is this, right? I want you to think about the words that play the population that we're amongst. Think about incarceration, think about segregation, think about probation, all of those TION words. The only way we defeat and combat that is with other TION words: education, duplication. Like that's before I got on this panel, I only knew one person, and that was Sean. But it's a pleasure to meet all of you all, because right now what we have done is strengthen the fraternity of network sharing. And that's what it's going to take to chip away at this thing block by block. So while I'm an attorney and I can only handle so many cases, I ask that we continue to be litigious, that we continue to use the voice that we have, where we couldn't express our own opinion because the media controlled all of the narrative. Well, now we have phones, we have Zoom, and so where it used to be that the revolution wouldn't be televised, it is active and live right now with us. And so my call to action is this: you can reach me at jarrettadamslaw.com. We need to continue to network and build this fraternity because right now, the only people who are really getting the benefit of release for COVID-19 are friends of people in higher places, right? Because if I'm not mistaken, Paul Manfred just walked in, but he's walking right out. So that type of stuff happens with networking, right? We need to build our own network. We need to continue to push forward. And if someone gets tired, we need to extend our palm and pull them with us. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Jarrett.
I'm passing it on to Sean Wilson.
How did I know that? Thank you, Jarrett. So our call to action for all of the folks who are watching from Wisconsin is that we're asking folks to contact all 72 of your county sheriffs. We have a sheriff toolkit that we're asking folks to utilize the letter that we drafted or use their own letter and send it to their sheriffs and ask their sheriffs to begin to depopulate their jails. We're also asking folks to continue to contact the governor and their elected officials. Unfortunately, here in Wisconsin, just recently, moments ago, the Supreme Court of Wisconsin just struck down the governor's safer at home order, putting lives at risk. So I'm calling on everyone in Wisconsin to continue to reach out to the ACLU, continue to join our efforts to decarcerate this state. Voting, we're working on a lot of voting issues. We know that our elected officials put many people, Wisconsinites, at risk when they allowed them to go and stand at the polls to cast a ballot. So if you want to join in with us on this work, go to our website, acluwisconsin.org, and join these efforts. If you want to contact me directly to see how you can get more involved in our Smart Justice campaign, I put my my email in the chat, and you can also reach me at swilson@aclu-wi.org. This is what we have to do. We have to come together. This is a collaborative effort, and we have to hold our elected officials accountable.
Thank you, Sean. Erica?
So my call to action is really simple. So what I would like to do is ask people, because as we know, COVID-19 is impacting Black and Brown people at a lot higher rate than other individuals. And Black and Brown individuals are fighting two wars at this time. They're fighting against COVID-19, but we're still also fighting against white supremacy and the violence against Black people. And so I just want to ask people, if you're in a position of privilege, that you use that privilege and not turn a blind eye, and that we hold our elected officials accountable to making sure that justice is served for our Black and brown brothers and sisters, and that COVID-19 is not the end, that we continue the fight once COVID-19 ceases. And so I just want to ask people to stand up and fight.
Nice. Thank you. Dominique?
Yeah, so I would encourage everybody who is privy to this conversation, reach out to your local ACLU affiliate, but also don't forget your smaller grassroots organizations. Here in Texas, in Dallas specifically, we have BYP 100 Dallas, we have TOP, Texas Organizing Project, Democratic Socialists of America, North Texas Immigration Coalition, all organizations that I'm involved with that I support dearly and would urge you all to reach out to and continue to support. Also, just remembering that the urgency of the moment does not pass when we're told that the pandemic has stemmed. And I encourage everybody to consider donating to your local community bail fund or mutual aid networks if you're able to, in order to continue this work. I think as we're moving towards ending mass incarceration, I think a lot of us are hinging more on abolition. We talked a little bit about that at the beginning of this call, and I think that is definitely the area we need to be carving out in order to see true progress for the liberation of Black and brown people.
Nice. We're coming up on time, so I'm gonna ask the participants and attendees to just bear with us for 2 more minutes while we do this last call to action and then close us out. Richard, you had anything you wanted to add on a call to action?
Sure. For those folks who would like to be involved in anything smart justice oriented here in Michigan, I just put into the chat a registration link for Day of Advocacy on May 27th that we're having. There'll be a town hall discussion with legislators from the state of Michigan, state representatives and senators as well. There'll be a day-long workshops that you can register for any day. You don't have to be from Michigan to register for it. It's an education opportunity and an opportunity to be advocated and aimed at decarcerating our state as a whole and the nation as a whole. So I just put that in the chat, and I put my email address in there as well. So if anybody wants to reach out for further information on that event or other events, feel free to do so.
Thank you so much, Richard. I will only add before I ask you, Kristie, to close us out, and lastly, less than 5 minutes, like 1 or 2 minutes, is that we're really pressuring governors.
A quick call to action, please. I'm sorry, John.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, sure.
It's all good. So we want folks around the nation to join our People Power, of course. We also want people to stay tuned for the next iteration of this town hall. We want to try to do this every quarter. And so we want folks to definitely be prepared and looking forward to us doing this again. I posted some links to join our national volunteer team as well. Thank you, Johnny. I apologize.
No, it's completely fine. I see my call to action is just echoing all of your calls to action. We're stronger together than we are individually. And folks really need to understand that pressuring our governors, and that governors had a really strong power to make a lot of the changes that we just talked about. So our call to action is to pressure the governors to not only, of course, release folks, but to also pressure policymakers to not use solitary confinement as a containment strategy for COVID-19. Folks should not be punished because they need help. But with that being said, it's been really honorable and really this is totally going on my bio that I was able to share space with all of you all. And Kristie, I'm going to ask you to just take 1 minute to really close us out, and then thank everyone. And I hope to do this again as either a participant listening to you or however else I can aid you and assist you in your journey. Kristie, thanks.
Thank you, Johnny, and thank you, everyone. The work that you have heard about this evening is centered in making the impossible, freeing our incarcerated community members and our family members possible. When I think of what John Brown and Harriet Tubman and Sojourner Truth and Nat Turner must have thought about their quest for freedom, it had to seem impossible. But they still pressed on, and freedom was found not only for themselves and their families, but for everyone watching this tonight. Our ancestors were and are the original guardians of liberty. They fought to the end for what we seemingly have today. Freedom, unless you are someone who's been convicted of a crime and suddenly all the things that normally would be a violation of your rights is the status quo as to how you were treated. We are seeking to abolish everything from the continued legacy of Jim Crow through the mass enslavement of Black, brown, and poor bodies in carceral facilities across the country to the violence that these various systems of oppression create, with the heaviest burden being carried by women, especially Black trans women. We recognize the intersections of government and industry in the name of punishment and public safety are unique, and yet we still refuse to take an easy path of reform that reinforces the system. We are seeking changes that require a different system. Is what we are working on and doing increasing the possibility of freedom is a question that serves as a North Star in our work. We are seeking to understand the power within and between these systems so that we can make the impossible possible. We know that building power in our communities is how we achieve the liberty and equity within systems that people deserve. Through our work, we are prioritizing community reinvestment, led by those of us who are most impacted and most harmed by the criminal legal system. We have a bottom-up framework here at the Campaign for Smart Justice that recognizes that our emancipation cannot be granted from the state or any other authority, but instead through the collective struggle and steering of this movement with our communities. We will continue to prioritize human rights and expose and abolish the violence that undergirds the carceral state. We will continue to create and contain space that trusts in our community's ability to heal and dismantle the systems of oppression at the same time. Because even if we see these plans adopted, we must investigate the ways that the ideals of white supremacy will continue to operate in our neighborhoods and city planning projects through police surveillance and control. We have to interrogate reentry programs because they often attempt to teach formerly incarcerated people to accommodate themselves to an unjust social order. To successfully complete the programs often has less to do with being changed, but more to successfully navigating programmatic norms and developing gestures that show remorse, compliance, respectability, and deservedness. And then you might unlock access to health benefits that will help you. The logic is if you fix the values of the person, you fix the crime problem without acknowledging the social disadvantage and underemployment of our population. With all this in mind, we dedicate ourselves to this continual fight for liberty and justice for our people. We would like to thank each of you for joining us tonight, and our hope is that you leave here more knowledgeable than you came, and that you commit to taking action and joining our campaign and our movement towards liberation. Thank you.
Nice. I had to snap my fingers to that. Thank you, everyone. Salute.
Kristie, I want to be you when I grow up.
Peace.
Y'all stop.
Thank y'all so much. Peace.
Peace,
Peace, y'all.